that we know almost nothing about. And I don't think I know anything much more than you, except the more that I think about the Sadducees, the more I realize that they're like me. They're text people. They want to know, what's the book say, right? So because one of the realities of Judaism in Jesus' day is that it's a lot of different things, right? The modern joke is that if you ask 5 Jews for an opinion on something, you'll get 6 different answers, right? And the same was true in Jesus' day. There's lots of different opinions as to everything, including what it meant to be a good person before God, or a good Jewish person, or however you want to say it. And the Sadducees were the dudes who, like me, are going, well, what does the book say? Go back to the book. And one of the things you don't find if you go back to the Old Testament is resurrection. Not a biblical idea back then, right? The whole idea of a resurrection is an idea that they borrowed sort of from the Persians and sort of from the Greeks, and they got this sort of whole mishmash of ideas, kind of like we got today, about what this all means. But the old book, the Old Testament, it's not there, not really. So, they know this young rabbi, Jesus guy, and he probably has all these modern fancy ideas, and so they're going to trap him with this question. Who, right? And it's a cool question because it goes back to tradition, right? And the tradition says that if there's a couple and the man dies and he's got no children, well, this is a problem, right? It's a recognition of a problem because back in the ancient world, they don't have Social Security and they don't have 401k plans. They have children, right? That's your Social Security, right? So that's why you have kids, so that someday when you get old, someone's going to feed you, right? So if a man dies and his widow has no children, who's going to feed her? Right, so then it becomes the duty of a brother to take her in, and this is a polygamous world. This is a world where a man can have more than one wife, so that's not a big deal, right? He may have a couple already, who knows, right? But his job is to provide children for her so that someone takes care of her in her old age, right? And if she can't have children, well, then it's like his responsibility to take care of her. This is a good plan. I mean, it's not a perfect plan, but it's a reasonable sort of plan. But of course, what happens anytime there's a plan is that somebody makes it into a series of rigid rules, right? And here's where me and the Sadducees wouldn't get along, because I'm not so much a rigid rule kind of person, and they are. Like, here's the rule, and this is what you got to do, right? At least in the end, we don't know if anyone actually ever did this. We presume that some people did, some people didn't, right? But they had a rule. And so they went through this whole scenario, but really, in the end, their question was, who controls the women? Because that's the sort of system it can become. It can become simply a matter of social control because, oh my goodness, a woman without a man, right, is just clearly lost, has no idea, and is probably just going to make trouble. So we got to make sure, in heaven, some man is keeping track of her, because who knows what she's going to do in heaven, right? Can't have a bunch of single women running around in heaven, just be chaos. Right? So in reality, the Sadducees' question is, who is or how are we going to maintain patriarchy in heaven? And Jesus says, no, that's not the system, right? And right, which also implies, for those of us who pray, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right, that this shouldn't be the system here either, right? I mean, it doesn't mean we should stop taking care of widows, right? But it should mean that maybe maintaining patriarchy isn't the major task of the church, right? Jesus says, no, it's not going to be like that. We're going to be like the angels in heaven. Well, apparently, someone's supposed to know the answer to that question of so what do the angels in heaven do? Does anyone know the marital system of the angels in heaven? Right? Me neither, right? So apparently, right, not like this anyway, is probably the best we can do. Right, so one of the things we learn at the start of this passage is that maintaining human systems of power is not our task as a church. Well, okay, so what is our task, right? And Acts says this, right? Right. So, well, here, let's go to Acts, right? Let's figure this out. The problem with going to Acts is that we start with such a big hole, right? And the big hole is that suddenly the women have disappeared from the story. We just had the resurrection, we had the Easter story, and all of the Gospels, right? All four of the Gospels say first people who knew this story were the women. They were the ones who saw Jesus first, who had the message first, and then, poof, 2 weeks later, their stories are gone. Doesn't mean they disappeared. Doesn't mean they stopped doing stuff, but Acts doesn't bother recording their stories. And that's just, let's just say that's really unfortunate, that their stories are every bit as important as the stories we get. And because the question of whose stories get told is important. And the shifting back to men is an important shift. Not a good important shift, but a bad important shift, because it changes the focus for what the Jesus movement is about. We can see this right in the story, right? In the story in Acts, the disciples come to Jesus. So this is like after the resurrection, that he's back-ish. They don't know how long he's back or exactly what this is all going on. But they say, hey, Jesus, is this the time? Have we finally got to the time when we're going to restore the sovereignty of Israel? Because they think that was been the plan the whole way along. Right? They think a big political takeover is what Jesus has really been working for this whole time. Cross was a temporary sort of, bump in the road, a big bump in the road, admittedly, right? But just apparently a temporary bump in the road. Now we're going to get it done, right? So that's what happens when you take a bunch of guys and you put them in charge of a movement, is they think, well, that's got to be the point. We're going to take over the government. We're going to take over the political system. We're going to be the ones in charge now. So that's the question they come with. And Jesus says, yes, you will receive power. Oh, right. Except not, right, from human institutions, but from the Holy Spirit. Right? Right. This power that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This power that I have. You know the song? The world didn't give it to me. This power that I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. Let's try it again. This power that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This power that I have, the world didn't give it to me. This power that I have, the world didn't give it to me. The world didn't give it, and the world can't take it away. Okay, right. So they're supposed to get this power and be my witnesses. Now, this is a scary word, because I'm guessing that many of you grew up with this idea of witnessing as going up to complete strangers on the street and sharing the 4 spiritual laws or something like that, right? Or these guys in suits who show up at the door and they want to witness. And if I'm guessing, if I said to all of you, well, let's go do that this afternoon, I wouldn't get an enthusiastic response. And most of us are, mentally hiding under the pews. Well, okay, yeah, Axel's all over this, but the rest of us, not so much, right? But the disciples are asked to be witnesses of who they are and the coming kingdom of God. And we need to recognize how big that jump is going to be, though, right? This jump between who they wanted to be the ones taking over the world, and, right, who they think they are and who they actually are at this point. It must have been very weird, I think, in a lot of ways, right? Because A, they want to be the rulers, and B, they think they are, they believe they are, they know they are the followers of the Son of God on earth, who is just resurrected from the dead. and the ongoing reality that they're just this tiny little group of people that no one has any idea what they're talking about, right? They're a tiny little minority among the tiny little minority that is Judaism, right? They're a little group among a little group, and no one knows what the heck is going on, and they're certainly not in charge of anything at this point. So there's this huge gap between their self-perception and their reality, which interestingly enough is also true of the modern church in America, right? Because not so long ago, the church was the major spiritual authority in America. The church spoke and people listened, and the president listened, and right, we were the ones, right, Billy Graham and all of this sort of stuff, right, praying with the presidents. We were the ones in charge in American history and society, and institutions, churches like this, right, were one of the bedrocks of Morgantown, right, and all the big churches downtown, those were the places to be for the people who wanted to be something. And that is only true today in small subcultures. If you're part of the church subculture, well, that's still true to some extent, but not very much, not very far outside it. And those big churches downtown are emptier than us, which is pretty darn scary because you don't want to be any emptier than this. Well, we don't want to be this empty, right? And, right, us at Morgantown Church of the Brethren, we're not even one of the big, ones downtown. We're not one of the, big churches on the edge of town either. We're just this, well, we're us, right? Here we are. Which is why it's so important for us to be witnesses. It's so important for us to display our identity, right? Because when people around us see church and hear the word church, they don't think about what it is we're trying to be. They've got all kinds of other pictures in their heads and all sorts of other history that, they run screaming in the other direction. And we have to be really clear about who we are and what we do and what we're trying to become here, because everybody hears church and doesn't think what we think. There's this other way of power, this other way of being in the world, in some ways a very women's way of power. If that's scary to some of you, that's okay. Scary we're okay at, right? Because the guys in the early church and before the early church and after the early church, right, wanted to be the ones to take over the world. So they went out there and they witnessed here and they set up churches there. And the reality is that if the guys go out and do that, someone's got to stay back home and feed the kids and have the kids, right? And there's still food to make, and there's still neighbors to take care of. And there's all of those little things, right, that have to be done that are the foundation of any strong institution. The church without those things never would have existed, but those stories are not told. We get the guys traveling around. In our Friday Roundup, for those of you who actually look at this Friday Roundup, I started to list all of the ways that this church is associated with food. And I got an impressive list. I was amazed. I was at a retreat this last week, right? And the speaker asked, so what are your church's association with food? And people went, oh yeah, we have a potluck once in a while. Oh yeah, little tiny things. And then I started my list. I won that one. Ha. Right? It's not a competition and I won. So there. Right. Well, you weren't there. But yes, right? If that's the standard we're using, we win. Good for us, right? Because this is, right, such an important way to build the kingdom of God in 21st century Morgantown. And it is just so amazing. And so we need to say that out loud. Right? Oh yeah, there's this group. They use our church for feeding these people, and there's this we do with food, and that we do with food, and because food is really basic. right? Everybody got to eat. And right, and what we do matters, right? So being a witness is just telling what you've seen, telling what you've done, telling what is going on. And that way, right, the children can go into the world and they can know that they've seen it done differently. That however it is that it's going on in the rest of the world, well, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? And the students and the teachers, and who are off in school, and they see the way power runs in schools, and they go, yeah, but it doesn't have to work that way. And those of you, right, who are in the business community and see the reality of cutthroat capitalism and narcissistic leadership, you can say, yeah, I see what you're doing here, but it doesn't have to be that way. There is another way, and I know there's another way because we do it all the time here at church. Sometimes we don't do it as well as we could, and then we'll try to work better, right? Confession, we're fine with confession. We do this all the time, right? Because there are so many systems out there that value the accumulation of power more than they value the needs of the workers or anybody else for that matter. We can be the others. So yes, you have received power. Cool, huh? And yes, you can be witnesses to another way. So we're going to go to some food now. Because food is just so very basic. It's so very important. But it's not just food, right? When Jesus shared this food with his disciples, he said, "This is my body," and we can debate the metaphysics of that if we want to. But the reality also is that if you just took some bread to your neighbor who's having a bad day, this bread becomes something else. It becomes a symbol of connection. It becomes a symbol of who you are, becomes a symbol of support, right? When you share a meal with somebody, that meal is more than just food. It's a lot of other things, right? And so we do this transubstantiation thing all the time, or consubstantiation, or however you want to substantiate any of this stuff, right? We do this because even the food, right? Jennifer brings bread, and this becomes something else because we share it, and it goes all over the place, and it feeds all sorts of people, and it creates connections between people. So this is where we're going now. Let's see if I can do something with helping the people at home being able to see. One problem at a time. Nope, that's not it. There we go. This one. Is this not on? I left the meeting.